And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Hello, I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on this Sunday, October 13th, 2024. And we start off with the state of the sea ice. There, with the colder temperatures, at least earlier on, with some early development of ice along the Arctic coastline, but with some of the strong winds that have been in place this weekend, it really has not allowed that to take much hold. And there still is that area of ice off of the Russian Arctic coast, but otherwise we're not really anticipating any notable development here for a little while longer. There is going to be a stronger low and cold front come in off of the Arctic Ocean, Chukchi Sea, and impact this area of the northwest coast, especially between Point Hope and Utqiagvik as we go through Tuesday into early Wednesday. So that will likely stir things up again. But there has been a very strong northeast to north winds along the west coast for the last 3 days, all thanks to this massive low pressure that crossed the Bering and then south of the Alaska Peninsula. It's currently just southeast this Sunday afternoon, southeast of Kodiak Island. It had a very broad circulation I've been talking about. Well, what has happened is it caused the water level to bottom out here today about 7 feet below the normal, what we call mean higher high water level. That's just kind of an average of the highest water levels over the last 30-year record. And so there along the northwest coast at Point Lay, we can see that water bottoming out here today on Sunday. It's going to come back up above the normal, what we would say is the higher high water level with that front, that stronger front with southwest winds and snow coming in on Tuesday into early Wednesday. It'll come back up a couple feet above that. But the water level as low as 6-7 feet below that norm. We've also had reports all along the west coast, especially there. The observer at Imanuk said it's some of the lowest water levels he's ever seen there along the lower Yukon coast. And it's the result of this very strong low pressure system that started out across the central Bering middle of last week, Wednesday, Thursday, and then came down across the eastern Aleutians and lower Alaska Peninsula on Friday. It had gale storm force winds with hurricane force gusts up to 90 miles an hour around Dutch Harbor in the eastern Aleutians on Friday. Also, there were some winds here up along the Katmai coast there as gust up over 90 miles an hour as the occluded front worked its way northward. This low has since filled, and by late tonight, early Monday morning, it'll have come up from the 950s millibars to 983. The low will gradually weaken and work its way eastward Monday and Tuesday before eventually crossing Haida Gwaii into the British Columbia coast by Wednesday. But that's been the reason why we've seen these low water levels develop this weekend along the western coast of the mainland. So as we go into Monday, the low continues to weaken. And Tuesday, you can just see it's definitely come up above 1,000 millibars. Here comes that winter system off the Arctic Ocean, Chukchi Sea. It'll be a little potent system that has some accumulating snow and blowing snow as it works its way into the northwestern coast, and then will overspread the mainland as it moves southeastward. There will be areas of snow and snow showers along with the colder air that pushes into the interior all the way down into the southeast mainland by Thursday. So this will be interesting to watch. This low that'll be crossing along and just south of the Aleutians Monday and Tuesday is not especially strong, and it's going to kind of ride up to just south of the Gulf as we get into the latter part of the week, Thursday. Be interesting to see if that energy may link up with the colder air coming down and if that might do something along the Gulf Coast as we get toward the end of the week. But otherwise, at least the low that's currently southeast of Kodiak Island, the winds are gradually going to be coming down in these areas, especially by the time we get into Tuesday. So for the inner channels, look for southeast to south winds, 15 to 20 knots, 3-4 foot waves, Lynn Canal, Stevens Passage down to Dixon Entrance. The outer coast, southeasterly winds 25 knots, more easterly to 30 knots, Cape Suckling, but at least waves generally around 8 feet on Monday. And then Tuesday, winds come down a bit more with the exception of down here. Southeast winds 20 to 25 knots there, Dixon Entrance, 5-foot waves. In the north, we look at north winds 15 knots, Lynn Canal waves 2 feet. Outer coast, southeast winds to 25 knots south of Sitka, 9-foot waves, and then those winds become more easterly at 20 to 25 knots with 8-foot waves. Now, on Monday, still small craft conditions along areas of the northwestern Gulf, lower Cook Inlet, east-northeast winds right around 25 knots, 20 knots within Prince William Sound with 4-foot waves. But otherwise, we're looking at 9-10-foot waves outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance and lower Cook Inlet, 5 to 7-foot waves with north winds at 25 knots. Tuesday, though, winds do come down notably. Variable winds only around 10 knots within Prince William Sound, 2-foot waves there. Offshore northerly 15-knot winds along the Kenai coast vicinity of Seward. And then northeast to north winds, upper middle Cook Inlet, just 10 knots more westerly, west-northwest winds, lower Cook Inlet to outside their Kennedy Entrance with 5-foot waves. Winds across Kodiak Island on Monday will be northerly 20 to 25 knots, and as we trail out down along the Alaska Peninsula, northwest winds 25 to 30 knots south of False Pass. Still some 9 to 12-foot waves on the Bering side there north of Cold Bay. Winds come down further Tuesday, looking at northwest to west winds, 15 knots in the vicinity of Kodiak Island, and then generally north winds around 15 knots along the Alaska Peninsula. Waves a couple of feet on the North Pacific side, and running 3 to maybe as high as 5-6 feet on the Bering side. For the Aleutians Monday, eastern Aleutians, northwest winds to 30 knots, still some 14-foot waves there outside of Dutch Harbor. Back to the west, winds shift more on the southeast, 25 to 30 knots, Atkuk, Adak to east of Kiska, and then kind of turn back around that circulation of that low I was speaking of that's not especially strong. And then on Tuesday, as the low kind of rides along and just south of the Aleutians, a broad east to northeasterly flow, strongest 25 to 30 knots, the general rule. So not an especially impressive system compared to the last one that came down across the central Bering into the eastern Aleutians late last week. So north winds will continue along the west coast, 20 knots out of Bristol Bay, still 30 knots out of Kuskokwim Bay, 20 knots, wider expanse of Norton Sound along the lower Yukon coast, 4 to 5-foot waves, and then 25-knot northerly winds there with 7-foot waves vicinity of St. Matthew. On Tuesday, we find winds northerly out of Kuskokwim and Bristol Bays, 15 to 20 knots with waves running a couple of feet. Northeast winds 15 knots around the Pribilofs with waves 4 to 5 feet, and then more of a westerly onshore flow, 15 to 20 knots Norton Sound and along the Yukon coast. Further north, winds will be northerly, lower Chukchi Sea through the Bering Strait, right around 15 knots, maybe a little stronger, 20 knots north side of St. Lawrence, but compared to what we dealt with this weekend with the gale force winds, things coming down. Northerly winds along at 15 knots there off of Point Lay. And then as we go into the eastern Beaufort Sea coastline in the eastern Arctic there, 6 to 7-foot waves with westerly winds 25 to 30 knots, Prudhoe Bay to Kaktovik. And then on Tuesday, with that system, that cold front approaching from the northwest and low pressure coming in off the Arctic Ocean and Chukchi Sea, we expect south-southwest winds to pick up 20 to 25 knots here, Point Hope on up toward Wainwright. And there'll be some snow overspreading this area of the coastline on Tuesday. Areas further east, look for southwest to west winds, 20 to 25 knots, Prudhoe Bay to Kaktovik. And then as we drop down through the Bering Strait, winds will be southwest to west, right around 20 to 25 knots, with 5-foot waves along the western coast of the Seward Peninsula, Wales down toward Nome, as well as along the north side of St. Lawrence Island during the day on Tuesday.